Tips to speed up your overall progress. Again, there is no fast track to this. There is no quick and easy ticket to turn in to just like see that body fat reduce or build muscle quickly. What it comes down to is consistency and adherence to your plan. The more consistent and the more adherent you can be to your plan, the quicker you're going to see that progress.
Welcome to the Mind in My Wellness podcast, your podcast for all things macros, movement, mindset, and everything in between.
Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Mind in My Wellness podcast. Today, I have a special little Q&A episode that I like to sprinkle in every now and then because I want to make sure that I'm answering your questions. So I always like to do Q&As on my stories and get the most commonly asked questions from you guys in terms of how I can best support you in terms of where you're at on your journey, whether that's just starting out with macros. Maybe you just learned what macros are, or maybe you've been exploring macros for a little bit and you're looking for more sustainable options, or maybe you're a macro vet, a macro pro, and you're looking to make it to that next stage. These Q&A sessions are really meant for you. And I have a bunch of great questions from you guys that I'm going to cover in today's episode. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The first question is, how can I increase my protein without also increasing my fats? And I see this really, really often come up within my coaching programs, within questions that come up in these Q&A boxes. And it can be very challenging when you have a protein goal and it's a much higher protein amount than you're used to eating to also keep your fat at bay. So if you're in a deficit, you might notice, and if it's your first deficit, you might notice, wow, I have a lot more protein to eat, but I have to be really conscious of my fats. And I know this is something that I really had to learn at the beginning because I was a fat-loving girl. I was eating tons of nut butters and just eating avocado out of the skin, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's all about balance. So a couple tips I have in terms of helping you increase your protein without increasing your fats as well is number one, look for lean protein sources. These are going to be things like chicken breast versus chicken thighs. Chicken thighs are also a great protein source, but they're going to have more fat content to them than just the chicken breast itself. That's a leaner cut of meat. So chicken breast is going to be very, very, very low fat and very high in protein. Same with things like pork tenderloin versus other parts of pork. Tenderloin, when you see that word, whether that's with steak or with pork, that is going to be a leaner cut of meat than other cuts of meat. So understanding those terminologies, ground turkey is another great example. There are so many options for ground turkey in terms of 99% lean, 93% lean, 98% lean, 85% lean. And you can really leverage ground turkey. It's one of my staple proteins I always have in my fridge because you can make so many different meals with it. And you can really take into control the fat content of that protein depending on what your needs are. Number two, a couple other options are if you're cooking with things like cooking oils, olive oils, avocado oil, a little goes a long way and that can really add up. So if you're in a deficit, and I don't recommend this all the time, of course you can take this approach all the time, but you can use things like cooking sprays. I have an avocado spray or an olive oil spray that I use when I'm in a deficit to limit the amount of oil that's being used. And I'll spray my pan before cooking. And that is how I go about cooking with oils. It is far less fat dense than actually dousing a pan with oil. And then also finding other types of lower fat protein sources like Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt is such a great example of this because, again, much like ground turkey, you can find different fat content in Greek yogurt. So you can find a 0% Greek yogurt, which has no fat in it. You can find a higher fat Greek yogurt, whatever really fits your needs at that given time. Same with cheese. There's cheeses that are non-fat cheese and they have that added protein in it. So a non-fat feta is a really good protein option that's not going to pack an extra fat punch in there. So as you start going about your tracking, you'll start to learn what are those leaner protein sources What are those sources of protein that I can get in that will be lower in fat? And that's really going to help you along your journey. Okay, moving on to question number 2. Fiber sources. Fiber is so important, and I talk about it a lot. And fiber is really going to help you with that feeling of fullness, satiety. It's going to help you with your blood sugar regulation. It's going to help you with that steady energy throughout the day. And it's also going to help you with fat loss if that's your goal. So some really great fiber sources are things like fruits and leafy greens. A couple of my favorite fruit fiber sources are berries. I'll throw those in Greek yogurt in the morning or in a smoothie. And apples are another really great fiber source. And then things like beans and lentils. I absolutely love my chickpea pasta, primarily because it is a great fiber source and it actually has additional protein in it too, versus just regular, wheat-based pastas. So subbing things for like a lentil, bean, chickpea type of pasta, if you love your pastas, is a really, really great option. And then another thing that you can do if you're grocery shopping at the grocery store, there are products that will show like keto products. And typically what that means is it's going to be a little bit higher in fat, but you can kind of start to look at nutrition labels and you want to find something if you're looking for a higher fiber content in a more packaged good, things that have a call out of like low net carbs. Essentially, what that means is that you have an overall carb amount, but fiber is a carb. So a net carb is removing fiber out of that carb count. So you might find something at the grocery store that says, 15 grams of carbs, but it has 8 grams of fiber in it. And so it's 7 net carbs. So that can help you if you're looking for things that say low net carbs on the packaging. Take a look at the fiber amount on that package compared to the overall carbohydrate content. If it's saying low net carb, most likely, and it's a little bit of a higher carb amount overall, more than likely you're going to have a higher fiber amount on that packaged good. So I always recommend trying to get your fiber sources in through those whole foods, but there are other types of packaged goods that you can look for and just pay attention to the nutrition labels as you're at the grocery store to see, okay, this has a fairly good fiber to carb ratio. It seems a little bit lower in overall net carbs. Anything that has 7 or more grams of fiber in it is going to be a pretty good fiber source if it's more of a packaged good. If you're seeing a nutrition label and it says, 35 grams of carbs and 2 grams of fiber, that's not a really great fiber source. That's going to be mostly refined carbohydrates in the form of starches and sugars, which can increase your blood sugar levels. And that's what can lead to those cravings later in the day or that unstable energy, that afternoon slump. Not that it's bad. You can absolutely pair those with a protein and a fat in your meal to help regulate your blood sugar levels, but just something to keep in mind if you are trying to increase your fiber sources. And then another question that I get often is, can I just supplement with a fiber supplement? And you absolutely can. But my question back to you is, would you rather eat your calories or would you rather take a supplement to consume your calories? Because fiber are calories and they are carbohydrates. So if you're taking a fiber supplement, you definitely still want to count that if you're strictly tracking macros. If you're in a very tight, restrictive calorie deficit where you want to be as accurate as possible, you're going to want to be tracking those supplements as well to your overall progress. So I always recommend going for more of those whole food fiber options versus a supplement, but you absolutely can if you're really, really, really struggling with fiber sources. But I'd first say really focus on what are those fiber sources, whole food fiber sources, or even more of those packaged good fiber sources that you can incorporate into your meals, especially if you're in a calorie deficit, because you're going to want to eat most of your food. All right, moving on to question number 3. If you stay within your overall calories, can you increase your protein and decrease your carbs and fat to see better results? So I will see people do this where I will send them their macro plan or we'll be within their coaching program and we're working within their macros and they'll want to stay within their overall calories because that's really, really important whenever you have a very specific goal at hand, but they want to increase their protein thinking, okay, if I increase my protein and decrease my carbs and fat, I'm actually going to see better results. And that is not the case. You have a very specific macro count for a reason, and carbs and fat come into play too. Carbs are your body's energy source. And again, we just talked about fiber. Fiber is a carbohydrate. I didn't mention this in the fiber section, but a good goal for fiber is anywhere from 25 to 35 grams per day. So if you're looking at your macros as a whole, you're going to want to make sure that you are getting those carbohydrates in your diet because that is your body's energy source. Your primary energy source is going to be from those carbohydrates. Of course, I always recommend that they are coming from whole foods more than processed foods and from fiber more than those refined carbohydrates through, starches and sugars. But making sure that you are getting in those carbohydrates is extremely important. And it's not necessarily something that you want to just completely cut back on. And then fat. Fat has a very, very, very particular role in your diet. For women in particular, that's going to be hormone regulation. And we really want to make sure that we are getting adequate amounts of fat in your diet. So not cutting back too far in that fat category to see your results. And typically here, anyone asking this question is in a calorie deficit and they're wanting to see fat loss as a result, or that, reduction of overall body fat, exposing that muscle. And your macros, if you go through a credible source, if you're working with a professional to get a macro count for you, or maybe you're going through a program, you're going to want to make sure that you are using a source that is going to be asking a lot of in-depth questions as they put together your macros for you. So this is why I don't recommend online macro calculators, because more often than not, they're just asking you a couple questions, then they spit out a very generic macro count. And if you go to 5 different macro calculators online, you're going to get 5 different macro counts. So you're going to want to make sure, if you are looking for a tailored macro count for you, much like what I do, I have a very in-depth questionnaire, and it's going over things like not only your daily activity in terms of exercise, but what does your day-to-day look like? What kind of job do you have? Is it more sedentary or are you more active? What does your dieting history look like? How many times have you been dieting in the last 5 years? What is your typical pattern in terms of eating? Are you eating breakfast? Are you not eating breakfast? How many meals a day are you having? It's really, really important that this plan is completely customized to you. And the more in depth that we can get, the better this plan is going to work for you. So if you're somebody who has gotten a macro plan from me, you're going to go through that in-depth questionnaire process, and the carbs, fat, and protein that I recommend for you are going to be very important and particular for your body and your goals. So trying to outsmart those or, increase your protein and decrease those carbohydrates and fat can actually have an adverse effect in the long run. So now moving on to the next question. I get this question asked very often, and people will ask, okay, how can I speed up my process? How can I see progress quicker? And the truth of the matter is, there is no quick fix here. What we're doing from a macro focused approach and nutrition periodization, which if you're listening to this and you're like, what the heck is nutrition periodization? I highly, highly recommend going to check out my free training, 3 Steps to Transform Your Body with Macros. I dive into macros. I dive into nutrition periodization and the different dieting phases and how you can use those and leverage those to reduce overall body fat, build muscle, see that body recomposition. So I will link that down in the show notes, but you can also go to mindedmymacros.com/masterclass to sign up for that free training. But I highly recommend you check that out if you do not know what nutrition periodization is, because it is so, so key. And this is a way, I'm speaking of speeding up progress in a way of not losing 40 pounds in 2 months, but how can we see that long-term sustainable progress and that long-term sustainable change that's going to last you for years and years and years. So you no longer are yo-yo dieting. You're not losing weight to gain it back, to then lose it again, to then gain it back. And each time you try to lose that weight, it's even more of a struggle. If you're listening to this and you're like, yes, this is me, definitely go check out that free training, because that is for you, my friend. But anyway, tips to speed up your overall progress. Again, there is no fast track to this. There is no quick and easy ticket to turn in to just like see that body fat reduce or build muscle quickly. What it comes down to is consistency and adherence to your plan. The more consistent and the more adherent you can be to your plan, the quicker you're going to see that progress. Now, if you're somebody who Monday through Friday, you are very consistent. Maybe you have a macro plan, maybe you don't, but you're really, really consistent with your overall eating habits. You know that you're really prioritizing your nutrition Monday through Friday, but then the weekends come around and it's a free for all. You know, you are not at all consistent on the weekends. This is where you're really going to run into a lot of trouble, is because that consistency and adherence isn't there. Now, when I say this, that does not mean that you need to be in a deficit and you need to be 100% perfect all year long. Absolutely not. Nor should you be in a deficit all year long and be restrictive. I know a lot of us, including myself years ago, would live in this restrictive state. And then I would, fall out of it on the weekends or on vacation or insert day of the week when I had a social event. And then it'd be this all or nothing mentality where I'd have to start all over again. And this is not going to get you to that long-term result, that long-term progress that you are looking for. So what you will need for consistency and adherence is a plan that works for you, with you. This is why I'm just not a huge fan of cookie cutter programs, because they do not work for most people, because you're trying to get yourself to fit into this mold when your mold is completely different from somebody else's. This is why we need a completely different plan per individual that's going to work with you. And something I see often right now, we are in week 2 of the summer reset, my 4-week program, my group coaching program. And a big theme that I saw was as I was going through creating everyone's plans, and people were messaging in the community like, oh my gosh, I'm in a deficit, but I'm eating more than I was previously. Is this right? Chances are on their health questionnaire, they were saying, oh, I'm trying to eat, 12 to 1400 calories a day, and I can do it 3 days out of the week, but I can't do it every day out of the week. Well, that is interfering with your consistency and your adherence. So of course, eating 1200 to 1400 calories, wherever they were falling in there, it's not actually working for you. And so it's actually better to increase your calories and be consistent in a deficit. And more often than not, your body probably isn't going to respond to that low of a calorie deficit, depending on the individual. So making sure you are eating at an amount of calories that if your goal is fat loss, it's still in a slight deficit, but you are not feeling so restrictive that you can't stick to the plan. So this is why having a proper plan can be such a game changer, but then also making sure that you aren't eating too restrictive that you can't be consistent in the long run. And again, overall consistency is the name of the game. Overall adherence is going to be what causes you to see those results more quickly and last, instead of a quick fix fad diet that, sure, maybe you see the pounds just drop off really quickly, but there's no way you can sustain that. There's no way you can keep that weight off. You go right back to eating, the way that you did, or you try really hard to maintain this diet that you're on, but it's very, very challenging for you, which is what I see very often. And that's not going to lead you to those long-term results that, don't have you going back dieting every single year, every single couple months. So really making sure that you are prioritizing that nutrition periodization that I talked about. You're prioritizing a consistency in your plan, and you are spending enough time at maintenance. You are eating at maintenance most of the year so that you are able to see those more efficient and effective results when you do enter a calorie deficit, because we want to make sure we're always keeping your metabolism and your hormone health top of mind. So moving on to the next question. What are your thoughts on having higher calorie counts on the weekends? So this kind of plays into what I just talked about. If you really struggle with the weekends, overall, number one, make sure you're not eating in a restrictive diet all the time. If you're living in what you would classify restrictive mindset with food or dieting, this is a huge, huge problem. Again, go listen to that free training because it talks all about this. But if you are in a calorie deficit, carb cycling is a tool that you can use, and I will use with a lot of my clients because of the sustainability when it comes to being in a calorie deficit and the flexibility it provides. So with carb cycling, this is when you have low carb days and high carb days. And if you're somebody who really wants more flexibility on the weekends, that's when I'd say, okay, let's pair those high carb days on the weekends so you have a bit more flexibility, but you're still staying within your overall plan. And this is going to average out to your average macros for the week. Now, with carb cycling, this is a whole nother topic. I will do a whole episode just on carb cycling because it's such a hot topic that I always get questions about, and it probably deserves its own episode in and of itself. But with carb cycling, that is an approach that you can take. But let's say that you're at maintenance and you just want a bit more flexibility on the weekends. That's totally cool too. You can think about your week as an overall average. Now, this doesn't mean go all out on the weekend and then totally restrict yourself on Monday and Tuesday. Absolutely not. This is going to do more harm than good to your metabolism. But it does mean that you have that fluidity and flexibility throughout your week. Your body is not looking at trends day over day over day. What it's looking at is trends over time. And so you can look at your weeks as a whole. Within my coaching programs like the Macro Accelerator, which is my one-on-one coaching program, we have a weekly progress tracker. And within that, it will calculate out your weekly averages. So as you're inputting, your macros for the day, maybe some days will be a little bit higher, some days will be a little bit lower, but as long as you're staying within that weekly average, and that weekly average is where your set macros are, your set calories goal is, that's great. You're staying within that average for the week. So that can provide a bit more flexibility too, which also really helps with things like as we're entering summer, how to prioritize social events and how to go on vacations and not stress about it. It's this thought of it doesn't have to be perfect day over day over day, nor is it ever going to be perfect day over day over day because real life just that does not happen. So thinking about averages, thinking about your week as an average can be really helpful when trying to navigate the weekends if you do want a bit more flexibility. But again, if you do have a very specific goal in mind as it pertains to fat loss and you have a fat loss plan, you can incorporate those high carb days on the weekend for flexibility. But remember, a fat loss phase should be very finite period of time. You should not be in that fat loss phase for more than 4 months maximum. For some, it's even less than that. And you want to get in and you want to get out, and you want to be as consistent as possible. So yes, those high carb days can really help on the weekends. But if you're going into a calorie deficit and you're also going into a summer where you have travels and events every single weekend, maybe now is not the right time to go into a calorie deficit if you cannot be adherent to your plan. So whenever you're going into a calorie deficit, whenever you're trying to lose body fat and enter a fat loss phase, I always recommend doing it at a time when you can truly dedicate to that consistency and adherence to your plan as much as possible. And of course, a day here and there, if it's a little off, that's totally fine. But if it's every single weekend that you are just not able to be consistent, not able to hit your plan, even if you have the flexibility of carb cycling, it's probably not the best time for you to be in a calorie deficit. Okie dokie. Last question for today's Q&A episode. If I don't love meal planning and prepping, how can I still make reaching my nutrition goals easy? So it's always going to take a little bit of preparation. There's no easy button when it comes to prioritizing your nutrition, but there are things that you can do to simplify your nutrition. So for myself, I'm not a huge meal planner and prepper. What I love to do is have those staple foods at my disposal in my fridge at all times. And what I mean by staple foods those are the proteins, the carbohydrates, and the fats that I know can help me hit my goals that I enjoy eating, and I can make very versatile meals with them. So I already touched on like ground turkey is one. That's my staple. I always have it in the fridge. I make pastas with a meat sauce with them. I make turkey burgers with them. You can make so many different things with ground turkey. Chicken breast is super easy. I will buy pre-shredded rotisserie chicken from the grocery store on those weeks when I'm like, okay, I know that I just need like easy throw together meals, that is such an easy option. So at Sprouts, I just get the pre-shredded chicken and I will toss those into meals so simply. It's all about making it as easy as possible for you to hit your goals. So if you're not a meal planner and prepper, that is a-okay. There are so many options in terms of, finding those staple foods for you. So again, ground turkey, chicken, those are some staples for me. Greek yogurt is a staple for me. I just love my Greek yogurt bowls. You can also toss in Greek yogurt on like taco bowls as like the sour cream. You can mix it in. I love making chicken salad to put on like toast. And you can make that chicken salad with Greek yogurt or with mayo, whatever you want to use. But you can take that, rotisserie chicken, chop it up, put it with the Greek yogurt and some mustard, whatever you want to make it. I'm rattling this off because this is what I'm currently eating on repeat every single day for lunch right now. But having those staple things that you can just easily throw together, but you can make so many different meals with them so it doesn't feel repetitive. I know that's something for me. I don't like to eat the same thing over and over and over again. Another tip you can take is if you do enjoy making dinners, make enough to have leftovers for lunch the next day or for dinner the next day. This is a huge win because you're making dinner already. Just double the size or, triple, quadruple the size. And then that will make enough for the next day, the following day, however much you want to make it for. And since you're already prepping your dinner, might as well, I don't want to say kill two birds with one stone because I hate that analogy, but that's the first thing, unfortunately, that came to my mind. So staple foods, making enough if you're making dinner or lunch or breakfast, whatever it is, just making enough for tomorrow. That in and of itself is saving you a lunch tomorrow from having to, if you're going into an office, instead of going and ordering out, cool, you made your lunch when you made your dinner last night and you can just take that with you. There are so many ways around meal planning and prepping. Those staple food options are going to be huge. So if you can identify what those staples are for you, what are those foods that you love that are the protein sources? What are those foods you love that are your carbohydrate sources and your fat sources? And then what meals can you make out of those together? This is really going to help you in the long run with just being consistent with your overall nutrition goals if you are not a meal planner and prepper, much like myself. All right, my friends, that is it for this week's episode. If you are loving this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you left a rating and review. I read every single one and they mean so much to me. And it really, really helps me and this podcast continue to reach a new audience who could really benefit from learning a very sustainable way of nutrition and dieting to get off that yo-yo dieting cycle, to stop restrictive eating and really understand how to see long-lasting results for them as an individual. So we'll be back next week with another episode of the Mind and My Wellness podcast. But until then, keep minding your wellness.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along and catch all future episodes to help you look and feel like the best version of you. I'll see you in the next episode.